Hi, this is my first post here, and I've been searching on what subreddit I should post this on because it kind of freaks me out. My boyfriend and I have been dating for almost 2 years now. We've been friends since 2017, and we moved in together last year, just before the pandemic started. My boyfriend, in moments of silence, would always look up at me and ask, "Did you say something?" Followed by, "Oh, I thought you said something." And when I asked what he heard me say, he said he didn't know and that he just heard my voice. Today, literally just now, he came in from throwing out the trash bag and he walked in and asked, "Did you say something?" I was on TikTok and I didn't say anything. I asked the usual, "Oh, what did you hear me say?" And usually, he doesn't know what he heard, he just knows he heard my voice. But this time, he said he heard me say, "Hi, Bob," which is our pet name for each other. He was standing in the hallway, and when he turned around, no one was there, and I was in bed. Has this happened to anyone else? My boyfriend is constantly hearing my voice when I'm not speaking. Sometimes, I genuinely think he's hearing my thoughts.
My father was a very friendly person. He had tons of friends. It was hard to keep track of who he spoke to, and he traveled a lot due to his work. He was also very strong. He had no severe health issues. However, when I was 10, he died. It was sudden, and we informed as many people as we could. One day, an old colleague of my father ran into my mom. She hardly recognized him, but they spoke and he said, "I saw your husband just a few weeks ago." Now, it had already been 2 years since my father's death, and the colleague didn't know my father was dead because he was away for years and had only come back to town to visit his mom. He also said that him and my father had a long conversation, and that they ended up having coffee together too. This happened again, this time with one of my mom's old students in his late 20s. He was a kid when he used to come over to my house and get tutored. My mother used to help him in math and English, and my dad used to give him snacks after he studied, and he'd even play with him too. He too didn't know my dad had already passed, and he told my mom how he saw my dad just about a month ago, and they spoke for a really long time as well. This happened like 2 other times, and then all quiet. It hasn't happened in a long time.
So to preface this, I found this sub today and went down the rabbit hole with everything that people have experienced. I kept thinking, man, what's the closest experience I've had to something like this? Well, it may not fit this sub perfectly, but there's one thing that I've realized that I have always been ominously at loss for an explanation. A few years ago when I was in college, I went home to visit my family for a holiday, whichever one it was. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and I lived about 2 hours from my hometown, so I visited rather frequently. I never liked going back home to visit because my parents went to bed around 8:30 p.m., and the house was an open design with wood floors, so the acoustics in the house made every step sound like I was hammering a bass drum. Not to mention that they never closed their door when they went to sleep, and I had to walk past their room if I wanted to go to any other part of the house. My room was at the end, a 20-feet hallway, and my parents' room was next to the entrance of that hallway. Well, that night when I was visiting, I went to grab a beer around 2 a.m. from the fridge in the garage. I tiptoed with my socks on, as ridiculous as it is to keep the house silent, and I grabbed a couple bottles so that I wouldn't have to do it again soon. On my way back to my room, I took a left to walk down the hallway, my back facing the open door of my parents' room, and I heard a sound that quite literally sent shivers down my spine. As I turn to take a left down the hallway, I hear the most distinct and terribly loud "Boo!" As if a grown man shouted at the top of his lungs, about 5 feet above and behind me. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but it was clear as day, and immediately, both our family dogs in my parents' room start barking and ran towards where I was. And I am so grateful for them barking, because I would be convinced that I have lost my mind if it wasn't for that. My stepfather has a nickname for me, Boo Boo, because that's what my little sister called me when she was too young to actually pronounce my name. It was nearly pitch black in the house, no lights were on, and I got around just from my years of experience living in the house. The second I hear the boo, I turned around and faced my parents' open door. I thought it was my stepfather yelling at me for being up so late, and it was too dark to see if he was standing at the threshold of the door, and I just assumed he was. Without hesitation, I run into my parents' room, honestly hoping it was him that said something. I wake them up in a panic saying, "Did you say something? You said something to me, right?" In a sleepy, delirious state, they say, "Huh? What the fuck are you talking about?" I ask them. If they heard that loud boo or boom, it sounded like both, and they look at me like I'm on drugs. To this day, I'm sure that's what they think, but the strangest part is neither of them heard the dogs lose their mind, which bothers me because saying my mom is a light sleeper is an understatement. After waking my parents and begging them to tell me they said something to me, I go to my room and called my best friend. I can still remember to this day the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood up while describing to him what happened. And after ending the call, I still felt the hairs on the top of my forearm stand straight up for at least an hour. It will always bother me, and I will never know what the hell it was.
This happened to me a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to explain it somehow by reading or by searching on it, but I couldn't find a description or an explanation about it. So here, I want to ask if any of you know what this could be, or if any of you have had the same experience. I was completely alone at home. I was finishing some dishes in the kitchen. The kitchen door and the window were open. It was quiet. Some light noises were coming in from around the neighborhood area. I had just put down my kitchen cloth on the counter when very suddenly every noise from the outdoor fully disappeared. It got dead silent for just a few seconds, and then I heard a very high-pitched electrical noise, and I very suddenly saw a golden and white bright flash. It was like a light explosion. It completely blinded me for like a fraction of a second. Basically, the entire world disappeared for a slight moment. And then as suddenly as it came, it was gone. And everything was back to normal, except for the dead silence outside. That didn't change for like another 15 minutes. It was a frightening experience. Even I screamed a bit like, "What the hell is this?" But before I could finish, it was totally gone. It really lasted less than a second. I live in an earthquake zone, and I tried to read about earthquake lights, but they seem to be a completely different phenomena. I also suffer from chronic migraines and have preventative treatment. I've experienced aura vision before a couple of times too, but nothing like this. So that's why I put this post in this subreddit. If any of you have had similar experiences or have any idea what this could be, I'm very curious to read it.
This happened several years ago when my friend and I were in high school. We would always hang out either at his house or mine, and we happened to be at his house for that day. He lived in a pretty normal suburban neighborhood with about a mile of woods behind his house, separating his neighborhood and another one. We liked to go back there and explore the woods every now and then, instead of staying inside and gaming. One of the times, We were exploring for a while, kind of just circling the woods. After walking around for about an hour or so, just chatting and messing around, we came across a seemingly random house right in the middle of a big clearing. We'd been in this woods several times before, but never saw this house. We figured we must have just never come this way before. We moved closer to investigate, and the place is basically destroyed. It's a single-story house, and there's a big hole on the back side of the house that looks like it was hit by a wrecking ball. We enter from there, and the inside is no different. Old, torn-up furniture, walls, and floors make up the inside. And at that time, my friend and I were fascinated more than anything, making theories and jokes to each other about what the history of this strange house could have been. At one point, we thought it might have been owned by some kind of serial killer because it had several newspapers scattered around it with a lot of missing persons reports on them. Again, being dumb kids, we somehow found this more amusing than anything, as if this place had been put here as some sort of haunted house destination for Halloween. Anyway, after further exploration of this house, we found what looked like a hatch on the floor that may have led to some kind of cellar or bomb shelter. It had a lock on it, and we couldn't bust it open, because as brain-dead teenagers, we wanted to go down there and explore some more. After a few more attempts to get this hatch open, we decided to head back to his house to get some bolt cutters. We get back to his house, grab the tool, and head back to where we came from. We had made our way back in the direction we thought the house to be in, but we never found our way back there. We thought maybe we had just gotten turned around, but we followed a pretty distinct path back. We spent maybe another couple hours combing that small stretch of woods for the house to no avail. A little weirded out, we gave up, headed back, and didn't really give it too much more thought beyond a couple internet searched for anything that may have been related to a house in the woods in that area. Nothing came up. Years later, my buddy and I are both married, and neither one of our wives believe our story. His wife even got on Google Earth and searched that area behind his old house. She found nothing. Does anyone have any theories on what could have happened to the house? Before you ask, no, neither one of us did any kind of drugs. We were pretty straight and narrow kids.
Alright, so check this out. This event happened about 4 or so years ago. I've been a piano player ever since the age of 4, and I'm flexing, but I've won multiple awards. Anyway, every day I strive to improve my playing by practice. But this one day, I looked up at the clock to check my starting time so I didn't overdo it. The clock read 4:15. I played for about an hour or so because when I was done, I looked up at the clock again and it was 5:15. I was feeling hungry, so I went downstairs to grab something to eat. When I got downstairs, my mom asked me what was wrong. I said nothing was wrong. Then she asked me why I stopped playing. So I explained that I had been playing for an hour, was feeling hungry, and now I'm downstairs to grab something to eat. But she told me I hadn't even been playing for 5 minutes. I turned around to the living room clock, and no, my eyes did not deceive me. It read 4:15. So I ran back upstairs to double check the original clock, and it also read 4:15. Time had gone back an hour, but I'm not sure if my mom had looped the thing she was doing because I didn't pay attention when I started practicing. So I just told her I didn't feel too well and I didn't play piano for the rest of the day. I've never had any mental illnesses or disorders in my medical history, and I wasn't feeling tired or sore that day. So I'm looking for if anybody on this subreddit could come up with a plausible explanation for what the hell happened that day, because the events still baffle me until the present time.
This happened to me this morning when I got into work, and I have no idea whatsoever how it happened. I arrived at work this morning at 7:45 and sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before gathering my lunch and exiting my car to head into work and clock in. My fellow office mates, which is 8 of us in total, tend to arrive after me 2 or 3 minutes before we begin our day at 8 a.m. But today was different. When I exited my car and headed for the office, none of my office mates had arrived yet. My coworkers who work in shipping and receiving, meanwhile, have been at work since 7:30 a.m., and I walked through the lobby, punched in the security code to access the warehouse, and headed for our break area to clock in on our biometric palm scanner. The device gave an affirmative message and displayed the time I clocked in, 7:56 a.m. Great! I opened the refrigerator door and placed my lunch towards the back of the top shelf before heading to the one and only stairwell to my office. This is where the glitch happened. I walked up the flight of steps and to my shock, all of my coworkers were already at their workstations. I asked completely startled, "When did you all get here?" They looked at me, confused. Claire, our marketing manager, said, "We've been here for an hour. We were about to head to my boss's office for a production meeting. Where have you been?" Still shocked, I said, "Where have I been? It's only about 3 minutes before 8. Oh." As I gestured toward my workstation, the time on my lock screen said 8:58 a.m. Somehow, I lost an hour of my time walking up the stairwell to go to my office. Does anybody have an explanation for how this could have happened?
Hi people. As the title suggests, I'm here to tell you about an unexplained phenomenon that happened recently. First things first, I apologize early for the bad English. I hope everything is clear. Maybe you won't take this seriously or not believe me, and I understand that, but all I want is an answer. A true answer. I'm that kind of person that doesn't believe in ghosts, magic, or other stuff. I always had a rational and scientific view on reality, but that night, my God, something happened. Let's start. May 29th, 2021, Italy. It started as a regular weekend. I was at a friend's house with some other friends. We were drinking something, chatting, and playing games. And it was summer, and sometimes we decided to go outside for walks because of that. It was nighttime, around 11:30. It was cloudy outside, but you could still easily see where you're going. We live in a countryside area, but it's not too far away from the nearest city. It's the typical Tuscany landscape. Anyway, we walked down the dirt road in front of the house, and 2 of the friends in our group were walking a little bit further and faster than the rest of us. But that is until one of those 2 friends come back to the group to let us know that he's lost the other friend. Just gone. In a matter of seconds. But how? It was at this point that things started to get really creepy. We took out our phones and we used the lights from them to search for him. Maybe he fell down somewhere, was on the side of the road. Nothing. We even called his phone and no answer. The road is like 200 meters with a straight dead end. How can someone disappear when they're right in front of you? So we thought, fine, maybe he went back to the house, we thought. So part of the group went back to the house to go look for him, and then I stayed with the part of the group that stayed at the dead end to continue to look for him. A little bit later, somebody in the group that went back to the house to look for him called me and told me to let everybody know that he wasn't at the house. And because our continued search wasn't successful, we went back home too. And on our way back to the house, as we almost got there, we saw our missing friend reappear from the road, running towards us. At first, he thought we made up some kind of a sick joke on him, but no, we told him as we were all walking, he just was gone, disappeared. And then he told us what happened from his point of view. He said that he made it all the way down to the dead end by himself, and then when he turned around, we were the ones that were vanished. He didn't see any lights, he didn't hear any voices, he didn't get any phone calls, nothing. He also thought that we were the ones that just went back to the house, so he went back to the house looking for us, didn't find us, went back to the dead end to see if we were there yet, still didn't find us. He did that 2 more times, looking for his friends. How is any of this possible? We stayed up and thought about it all night, searching for some kind of explanation of what we all saw. But how do you even explain this? That night still haunts me, and I don't post much on the internet, but now I just need an answer. So if you have some ideas, a question, or maybe had a similar experience to this one, I'm always available. Thank you for reading. Have a good day.
I have no explanation for this and hope that someone might have a guess because I am stumped. This happened maybe 10 minutes ago. I was standing at the top landing of my stairs looking at my cat. She was sitting on my parents' bed in their room. My parents' room is right in front of the staircase with a small foyer and hallway in between. From where I was standing at the top of the stairs, I could not see the bottom half of the stairs. I wasn't right on the ledge. Well, I blink, and suddenly, I hear bells chiming near the top of the stairs. All of my cats have them on their collars. I immediately assume that it's my other cat who must have been on the bottom half of the stairs, and I didn't know she was there. But it wasn't. I looked down to see the cat that was in my parents' room is now standing by my feet. Confused, I look back down into my parents' room, and sure enough, there's no longer a cat on their bed. This all happened within maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Either way, even if she had extreme zoomies, she would have never jumped off the bed, ran through the hallway, through the foyer, and up the stairs in that time. There's no way. Not only that, but my cats have bells on their collars. I would have heard the bell when she jumped down from the bed and the whole time she ran up the stairs. But there was no bell. The bell in my cat only appeared at the top of the stairs. She seemed completely fine when she reached the top of the stairs and brushed up against my legs. For additional context, it was daylight and my cats looked completely different. There is no way that I could have mixed up which one I saw on the bed, even at a distance. One of my weirdest glitches was about a little comic strip that I made for my school's newsletter. For several years, I spent hours each weekend drawing and writing funny little scenarios for my cast of fictional classmates. And yes, I did have a lonely childhood, but that's another matter. I'd become quite familiar with all of these kids, just as writers would with the characters in their books, except I had a portfolio of hand-drawn pictures for each of them. The one I had the closest personal connection to was, of course, the main character, and he was in almost all of the comics. Through my entire childhood, my family would occasionally visit my dad's old co-worker from a local factory. The co-worker was a pleasant older gentleman, then retired at the time of this story, and who lived with his wife in a double-wide in the middle of a large trailer park the next county over. For those who are not familiar with them, mobile homes are small prefabricated houses built on top of a trailer and moved to the owner's property. Most often, that's a small rented section of land with a concrete slab where the trailer is parked and set on blocks. As part of a planned community with streets lined with similar houses called a trailer park. Also, for context, a double-wide is one of these houses that is made in 2 sections on separate trailers that are joined together on site. The spacious doubles are considered a luxury in those parts. From what I understand, the couple was well off at least by the standards of those who lived in these communities. During these visits, the couple would give us sodas while the adults would reminisce about the good old days. They sort of became like family, and as we'd see them more often than our own relatives. The fact that the couple lived much closer than them played a part in that. Sometimes, the couple would also go on about their kids' jobs and how the grandkids were doing in school. I'd heard so many stories about their family over the years that they'd almost felt like acquaintances that I'd never actually met in person. Somehow, we'd always just missed them when we came around. Even weirder, I rarely saw any pictures of them, and a few they had on display were years old by then. As for the glitch, on one of these visits, I walked in behind my parents and was quite surprised to see a boy sitting cross-legged on the floor in the middle of the living room. He was around junior high age with light brown hair and a bowl cut with faded sides, a style that was popular for boys back in the 90s. And even though I'd just met this kid, I got the uneasy feeling that I'd seen him before. I'd never met any of their friends or family in person, nor was it from photos, as any of those I might have seen were so old that I wouldn't easily recognize him. But then, it hit me. The kid looked like the main character from my comic. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. However, I was familiar with every curve and detail of my character's face because I'd drawn him many times before. This kid looked exactly as I would have pictured my character if he were an actual person. Even the style and color of his hair was the same, and there he was, sitting on the floor in front of me. The likeness was so uncanny that it gave me chills, and I snapped out of my trance-like state as the couple introduced him as their grandson. The clincher, even his name was almost identical. I don't specifically recall what the two names were now, as there were a few common ones in the day that were so similar that people often got them confused. Now, I'm sure many are thinking that I must have subconsciously created my character after the grandson. While they had mentioned the kid by name before, as old people often dote on their grandkids, I never in my life had seen a photo of him that was remotely recent or anything of him that would have influenced the way that I drew my comic. And even though I'm a staunch skeptic, I have no rational explanation for such a unique and bizarre coincidence. I drive a lot for work. I probably spend 6 hours a day driving around town, checking on crews and going to meetings. I have a very close friend who runs a general contracting business, and I do about 20% of my business with him. I see him anywhere between 5 to 15 times a week, and we hang out in our free time. My friend is very easy to pick out, on the road and in person. He has a Ram 2500 with a slightly mismatched bed cover and a 4-digit custom license plate, not obscene, but easy to remember. Tuesday of last week, a black F-350 is driving slow for the interstate. I catch up and notice my friend's license plate, but it's on a different truck. I pull up next to the driver's side door, and it's my buddy. He always wears a hat and has a thin beard because of his acne scars. He's not wearing a hat, and he looks right at me and doesn't acknowledge me at all. Normally, he would flip me off or pretend to drift into my lane, something stupid or dangerous. So I follow him for a while and continue to try and rile him up. I'm honking and waving, and he just calmly looks at me and the road several times back and forth. Finally, I get to my exit. I text my friend, "Hey, when did you downgrade to an older truck and why are you driving like an idiot?" He calls me instantly and asks what I'm talking about. I told him that I recognize his license plate and pulled up next to the driver's side door, and he didn't even acknowledge me. He said, "Well, that's weird because I'm in my Ram right now driving westbound." I asked what overpass he was near and told him to speed up and catch up with his truck. He agrees to try and catch up with the black Ford and call me as pulling up to it. About a minute later, he calls me and says, "I don't believe this. I see my license plate on the black Ford." I'm getting pretty excited and I tell him to pull up next to the driver door and look at himself in the truck. He starts laughing and says, "Whatever, man." And as he's laughing, he pulls up to the truck and he stops laughing as soon as he gets pulled up next to it. He's silent for a few seconds and tells me that he'll call me back. My friend didn't call me back that day or the next day, which is pretty unusual. I finally get a hold of him the next day and say let's grab beer after work. He agrees to it and I met up with him around 5 o'clock. We got to the bar around the same time and I immediately asked him what he thought about his doppelganger. He just got kind of pale and refused to acknowledge that I asked the question. The whole experience was pretty strange, but what I thought was the most interesting was that they were separated by only a mile or so. We run into each other on the road quite often, so that wasn't much of a surprise. My buddy is a pretty straight-laced guy, grew up rural and wealthy, and I've asked him in the past about woo-woo stuff in passing, and he always laughed it off. To see him that spooked and his reaction over the phone really set this event apart. I was at my aunt's house last summer, just before lockdown happened. I was taking a bath there, and I had the bathroom locked, and also the dressing room double bolted. You can never be too sure using somebody else's bathroom. Basically, the layout being, Aunt's bedroom had the dressing room, and inside, which was the bathroom. And the bathroom door had a stained glass in it, via which one can see if somebody is outside in the dressing room, but not clearly. Anyway, I clearly heard the lock opening. Click, click, once and twice. That were the double bolts of the dressing room, and I was in the bathroom. I thought my uncle had come home early from work in the afternoon, which was strange in hindsight, and my first concern was that my clothes were out there in the dressing room while I was showering in the bathroom. So it's kinda awkward. I heard a pair of heavy men's shoes against the floor and saw a very tall black silhouette that seemed like black pants through the stained glass of the bathroom door. It approached the cupboard and heard the telltale creaking of the cupboard door swinging open loudly. All this was happening in the dressing room and on the other side of the bathroom. While I was inside, waiting for him to get out fast so I can get my clothes from the dressing room and get dressed. 1 minute passed. I kept waiting. Then another, and I was getting cold, and all I could think was, what's taking him so long? I peeped through the stained glass to see what he was up to, as there was no sound of him going about his business. I opened the bathroom door, and there was nobody in the dressing room. He must have gone out, but I've never heard the cupboard door or the dressing room door closing, and I was looking through the glass all hypervigilant constantly to know when he goes out, but I didn't think much of it. I quickly got dressed, picked my shit up, and went on to open the dressing room door. It didn't open, and my blood ran cold. The dressing room door was still locked. I opened it. Click, click, once and twice, the double bolts. I was confused at this point. Had he locked the door from the outside? I later checked, and it can't be locked from the outside. I went out and my baby niece was still sleeping in the bedroom. I went out in the lobby where my sister was watching TV close to the only entrance of the house. I knew the answer before I even asked her. "Did Uncle go in the dressing room?" She looked at me weird and said, "It's 3 in the afternoon. He doesn't come home before 9 in the night. And nobody's home. Nobody went to the bathroom." So I went on and told her about the whole thing, after which she lost her shit too. She went in the dressing room, and lo and behold, all the cupboards were locked. "I swear to God," I told her, "that cupboard did swing open with a creaking and all." Then we called Uncle at his work, and he hadn't left his office, and he didn't come home. The very next day, my sister and cousin were watching TV at midnight, and they felt a presence behind them while they heard the stove in the kitchen being switched on, and felt something go behind them and up the stairs. Their house has an extensive history of crazy shit going on, and yeah, they shat bricks. This happened yesterday. My teenage daughter and I decided to take a drive around the town that my parents live in. I lived there on and off for 30 years, and she lived there with us for around 10. We walked and drove all over, so are familiar with the roads. We were recording everything on my phone. We started at an old cemetery. Then it started to rain, so we decided to drive around a bit, then go to a local park. The first place we went was to a house that the locals call the castle, a huge stone structure with gargoyles and an iron fence. It never stays occupied for more than a year or two, but nobody has ever gotten a story out of the previous owners since they all seem to move far away. After that, we drove to the park. That is where the first strange thing happened. We turned onto the street the park is on, and both noticed that the park was too close to the intersection. There should be 2 houses with really big yards. One of the houses had a big yard, but the yard was way smaller than it should have been. The park is old. It hasn't had any new construction in years. The part of the park right there is an old basketball court made out of cement, cracked, faded grass growing in it, and the hoops vanished a long time ago. That was odd, but the park itself seemed normal. It stopped raining, so we wandered around the park for a few minutes, then got back in the car. We ended up driving, sort of aimlessly, until we ended up turning on a little street called Flint Road. It should have almost immediately curved sharply and intersected with another street. But it didn't curve, just went on straight for way longer than the road actually should have been. When I went back later and checked on Google Street View, the turn is visible from the intersection. The street should have nothing but woods on the right side until it ends. But after about the right amount of time for the road to have ended normally, houses started to appear. They weren't particularly old, but they also obviously weren't super new construction. After a couple minutes, I started getting really confused. I knew the road was supposed to turn, and I knew it wasn't that long. The road finally ended and we turned. I haven't driven that way in a few years, so I couldn't be sure exactly what it was. but something about the intersection seemed wrong. The road turned dirt, and then things really went weird. It was the wrong road. I don't know how else to describe it. My kid was unfortunately pointing the phone toward the passenger side window, and there weren't any houses on that side. But the ones that I saw on the right, there's no way those are the ones that show up on the map. And according to a check online, most of the houses on that dirt road were built around 2006. Even just looking at the video of mostly woods on the passenger side, or looking at the street view of the area, there are some geographical features that are off. Things that can't be explained by just grading the area by the roads or trees going up. And it seemed like it was longer than it should have been. I figured out the length the dirt road is supposed to be, and it should have taken about a minute, maybe a minute 15, to drive at the speed that I was going. But it took us about 2.5 minutes. For it to have taken that long, I'd have had to be driving at a walking pace. The dirt road ended at an intersection with a road that put us back where we started. Again, the intersection and houses around it seemed so off somehow, but I can't say exactly how. I want to say it's just because I haven't been down in a while and things are grown up more now. But it seems like it's something about the layout of the houses. Their placement isn't right. But I can't point to something and go, that's wrong in the way. Anyway, it was weird. This happened maybe 12 years or so ago, but it has stuck with me since then. I was leaving the library and headed home. The street I was on ended at the end of the park where it intersected with another street. I had just turned onto the street, and there was a car up ahead waiting to make a right-hand turn onto the intersecting street as another car was driving down that street. I watched as the car cleared the intersection, and I looked down to check my speed or maybe change the radio. I can't remember exactly, and I had the thought that the car was going to turn and crash into the other car. Mind you, when I looked down, the moving car had just finished clearing the intersection. But before I can look up, I hear a crashing noise. And I look up and the car that had been waiting to make a right-hand turn had just crashed into the back panel of the other car. Not even by just a small amount, they hit it just after the rear door. I know the car had been out of the intersection when I had looked down. It couldn't have been another car, as the park gave me a clear view that no other cars had been coming down the road, and not enough time had passed. Just somehow, in that moment that I looked down, the car that had been passing was pulled back far enough that the other car turned into it. I remember when I passed the accident and the drivers had gotten out of their cars and had confused looks on their faces, as well like they had no idea how the car had gotten into a place where they could have happened either. I had been tempted to stop and ask if they had all thought the car had been clear of the intersection too, but just couldn't, as I wasn't sure that I wanted to hear the answer. That's the only time I've ever had anything like this happen, and I hate that I can't figure out how it happened. I was driving to a friend's house around 9 p.m. tonight. It's only about a 10-minute drive, but I noticed something weird after about a minute of driving. There were no streetlights on that portion of the street. I thought they must have been turned off or something, but these 5 or so streetlights on that portion are a fairly new addition to the road. My car has a squeaking noise that I'm trying to find and I can't figure out. And I noticed that the sound wasn't happening anymore. I also was thinking how quiet it was sounding, and I realized my tires were not making any noise. I was sure of it because my windows were down. I have mud tires as of last summer, which makes a distinct rumbling or whir sound while I drive, but the tires I had before these made no noise. At this point, I thought that something strange was going on, and when I pulled up to the next stoplight, I looked at the funeral home across the street. I noticed that they had all flowering bushes in front of the building, rather than the newly made parking spots. This light also just didn't change from red to green for about 3 minutes, and with no cars around this whole time, I just drove through the intersection because I thought it wouldn't be changing anytime soon. These changes that I noticed are indicative of what my drive to my friend's house would have been about 3 to 5 years ago. Is it possible that I shifted back in time 3 to 5 years just during this drive? Or maybe an alternate reality? Once I got to his house, everything was normal, and I told him about the events. And driving back home, everything was back to how it normally is. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Ralph, Tasha, Fire05, Gabriel, Eskimono, Silver Threads, Sevenfold, Moschino, and Lori. Thank you very, very much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.